Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan, and I am the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I will share and read Chapter 13, How I Recognize Harm. I have a memory. I was very young, running back and forth between two men who were sitting on either side of the living room, both of them shirtless. It wasn't easy to breathe. There was an immense pressure in my chest. What I braved. It wasn't until 1998 that I began to consider talking about the experience of sexual abuse I had endured in my childhood and early teenage years. While living in Vancouver, I rented videos from a shop owned by a lesbian couple. I loved their energy. I sensed a grace about them and felt safe sharing not just parts of my day, but from time to time, parts of my life experience. My therapist once explained that the work I did in his office could be likened to a laboratory. It was a safe space to experiment. He added, though, at times it might be vital to take the experiments and apply them in the real world. That felt scary. During one session, with the focus on my sexual abuse, he asked if there was anyone I might feel safe sharing this with. I remember reeling with the thought of my family knowing this was a secret I must keep safe. After a few moments of thought, albeit while not really breathing, a forced exhale had me share maybe the lesbian couple that owned the video shop. He smiled and said, "Would you feel safe with them knowing this part of your truth?" Being of Irish lineage, I was always interested in Irish movies or films. The culture I felt reflected what I endured with my family. I've yet to visit Ireland, but I will do so one day. One Friday evening, I wandered into the video shop and asked for movie recommendations based on Irish themes. Quickly, one of these amazing women said, "I'd highly recommend Angela's Ashes." I remember my therapist talking to me about that book in reference to some of the experience I had with my family. At the time, he suggested I not read it. After making a recommendation, she added, "There might be something about sexual abuse in it, but I'm not really sure." I immediately felt my stomach tighten. I lost my breath, and I had this urge to run away. But because I learned to breathe in my therapy lab, I chose to bring that experience to the real world. As I turned to face my movie aficionado, I was shaking. I felt nauseated by the fact that I was even considering telling her about my sexual abuse. I took a long, slow, deep breath and whispered to my little boy inside, "You are safe here. I'll take care of you." I was quick to share. I think my therapist suggested I not read that book, and perhaps watching the movie might not be a good idea either. She was quick to respond, "Oh, you're in therapy. That takes a lot of courage." Here felt the perfect, although terrifying moment to share some aspect of my experience of surviving sexual abuse. As her last word, courage, dropped from the air, I could feel a rise of emotion within me. I wanted to cry. She moved towards me and gently asked, "Are you okay?" Quietly, I replied, "I'd like to share something with you that is really terrifying for me to think that someone would know this about me." Her hand touched my shoulders, and I heard her say, "I'd be honored to listen." The words that flowed from my lips felt strangely difficult to form. It reminded me of the time I sat with my wife and said, "I am gay." The three most difficult words I've ever said in my life. I quietly said, "I was sexually abused as a little boy and as a teenager." All I could feel was my heart pounding. I'd add, it was one of my big brothers that abused me. As her arms wrapped around me in an embrace I thought only Mum would give if I told her my truth, I began to sob. And as she held me, she never uttered a word. After what felt like an eternity, with literally no one else in the store, I looked up at her and said, "Thank you for helping me feel safe enough to tell you my secret." She stepped away from me and gently nodded. I felt she understood, and more importantly, I felt her acceptance. After collecting my thoughts, breathing again, and wiping away my tears, I said, "There are two things my therapist will appreciate when I see him next. One is that I didn't rent the movie, and the second would be that I shared my experience of sexual abuse with you. What I braved by telling someone about my experience was an ability to finally free myself from thinking the abuse was my fault. Because at times, as a gay boy, I enjoyed it. I learned with the help of these women that if I liked the attention I was getting or got sexually aroused during the abuse, even if I sometimes wanted the attention or sexual contact, it did not mean I wanted or liked being manipulated, controlled, or abused, or that any part of what happened in any way was my responsibility or my fault. I was gifted with much wisdom for being brave enough to share. I'll always remember both of them hugging me and saying, "It breaks our heart that, as a gay man, you have no men to talk to about this." One would go on to say, "We're blessed because in the women's community, it's a topic that's open to share about all the time. It's one of the ways we've been able to heal and proclaim that we are survivors of sexual abuse and not victims." The unlearning. Myth versus reality takes a long time to investigate while holding so much guilt about being sexually abused. Because I waited so long to confront my issues, that too became a judgment against myself and a barrier to healing. It wasn't easy to find the myths and reality, the mistaken beliefs about male sexual assault, in order to begin to uncover the realities that I faced. So I dig in and discover some of the myths that ruled my beliefs, and thankfully, also the reality for someone as a survivor of sexual abuse. Myth. Because I was a male, I shouldn't have been sexually assaulted. Reality. Men are sexually assaulted. Any man can be sexually assaulted regardless of size, strength, appearance, or sexual orientation. I thought it never should have happened because I bought into the false power of masculinity. Boys are supposed to be tough. Myth. Only gay men are sexually assaulted. Reality. Heterosexual, gay, bi, trans, and two-spirit men are equally likely to be assaulted. Being sexually assaulted had nothing to do with my sexual orientation, current or future. Myth. Only gay men sexually assault other men. Reality. I would discover that most men who sexually assault other men identify themselves as heterosexual. My perpetrator, who was my big brother, led life as a straight man. I'd learned another tough bit of reality, that sexual assault is about violence, anger, and control over another person, not lust or sexual attraction. Myth. Sexual arousal during a sexual assault means you really wanted it or consented to it. Although there were times when I liked the physical contact, most times I felt my body betrayed me. Reality. My physiological responses that resulted from physical contact are a normal reaction by my body. Those responses did not imply that I wanted it or enjoyed the assault and did not indicate anything about my sexual orientation. My perpetrator was aware of how my physiological responses confused me as a victim of sexual assault. It motivated him to manipulate me to the point of physiological responses to increase his feelings of control and to discourage me from reporting what he did as a crime. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel. The aftermath was devastating. It took me a long time to understand that sexual assault is trauma. The trauma of sexual assault involved losing control of my own body and fearing possible death or injury. When I began my therapy, I discovered that there were certain ways that human beings react to trauma, and it wasn't different for men, whether bi, gay, trans, two-spirit, or straight, or for women, for that matter. My therapist was gentle enough in introducing me to rape sexual assault trauma syndrome, a term that mental health professionals use to describe the common reactions that occur after sexual assault. I thought, instilled in my belief of there being something wrong with me, that rape sexual assault trauma syndrome was an illness or an abnormal reaction. It is a normal reaction to an abnormal traumatic event. I should have been able to fight off my perpetrator if I was a real man. Another closely related belief that was that no one could force me into sex as a man. I either wanted it or I didn't. all tough beliefs to let go of, especially when my therapist reminded me of how young I was when most of this happened. As long as I continued to breathe life into these beliefs, they would leave me feeling isolated, ashamed, less of a man. I suffered in silence because of these feelings. And I'd add confusion and self-blame to the list to further keep me away from healing. The unlearning for me was extensive. I had to handle that I was victimized, which goes against the mores that a man should be able to defend himself against all odds. I had to unlearn the beliefs about manliness and masculinity that were deeply ingrained in me, so I could stop feeling guilt, shame, inadequacy for being a male survivor of sexual assault. I had to unlearn being silent about the impact psychologically because of the sexual assaults. It took me some time to understand why I felt terrified when a sexual partner either accidentally or purposely covered my ears. This would trigger flashbacks, memories of the assaults, or just plain bad feelings. I had to ask my partners never to do that. It took a lot of courage to have that conversation and make that request. Unlearning my internalized homophobia due to the feelings of self-blame and self-loathing was especially challenging to face. It was heaped upon plenty of homophobic sentiments in society and in my Catholic family. Finally, and perhaps the biggest unlearning, was that these assaults, combined with my internal conflicts about my sexuality, had nothing to do with believing I somehow deserved it, that I was paying the price for my sexual orientation. I remind myself constantly, and it's vital to remember, especially when I'm listening to a man tell me he was sexually abused, that sexual assault is an act of violence, power, and control, and that no one deserves it. This was a tough and very long chapter to write. And I'm really proud to very easily be able to engage in conversation around this. Comparatively, for the decades that I believed all of what I shared with you today that were myths. And I'm proud to have kind of unearthed the realities to set myself free and really set myself on a path that I felt I deserved to actually heal this dynamic. I really am and still have this sadness for the male community. Gay, trans, straight, bi, I think there still is a stigma. I don't have a lot, and it doesn't mean if they're not talking to me about it, I don't have a lot of male friends that actually talk to me about this. I'll share with them, and I don't expect them to reciprocate, but not a lot come to me and say, I've got a bit of an issue I want to chat with you about and disclose. So I don't know how far that needle has moved in relation to the stigma gone from men being able to talk about their experience of being sexually assaulted. I remember when the Me Too movement showed up, I really hesitated to actually share. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a male-dominated, me taking it over a woman's experience. It was kind of that feeling. I didn't want to do that. I hesitated for a period of time so that it could be grounded and deeply rooted right in the women's community. I mean, particularly the founder being a black woman. I wanted to honor that. I didn't want to sneak it away, right, as a white, privileged gay male who had that experience as well. But when I eventually could kind of own it and use the hashtag #MeToo from time to time, it did inspire some men to be able to go, wow, I thought I was alone. And we would talk about, right, the fear of co-opting that movement, particularly as white men. And eventually we got comfortable in knowing that from time to time we could actually join, right, the women that were the powerhouses behind that movement and not be ashamed and not be afraid and not feel guilty from being able to say that we too had had that experience. Because ultimately the only way to ease my own humanity around that and to trust that it's not an experience that I'm going to have again, I needed to make sure that those folks I connected to never felt that I was actually having them think that my experience was greater than theirs. I mean, particularly with my bias and my privilege and my blind spots, right, as a white person. So I'm really proud to have brought some energy to this notion of sexual assault and abuse and live today as a survivor and not a victim. And although this might seem a little bit strange, and I'm always a little bit careful how I share this, but I'm going to share it with you, it's this idea of, I did some work in San Francisco a long time ago. It was a leadership training program called the Liberty Experience. and a 3 or 4 day experiential weekend, really a deep dive into shadow, into dark, but also being able to find the light within my life. And Matthew, who was a minister, a pastor at the time, who ran this weekend, brilliant man, who is still, part of my life. I can chat with him from time to time. Yeah, really, really brilliant. When I shared with the group the experience of sexual abuse, Matthew said, Thomas, if there was a light in it for you, what would it be? And he'd go on and share kind of the light from his experience of actually being sexually assaulted. And it was really tough for a little while to be able to find the light, right, in something deemed bad. Was there something that I could use within an experience that actually I could celebrate? And here's what it is. And I say this with much humility, that my way to connect with my husband, and prior to my husband, former partners, where there was a degree of grace and honor, and not that when it wasn't, when I was sexually connecting in other ways, not bad, right? I'm really sex positive. But here's what I discovered, right? I could take the energy of being seduced by my brother and be a really great seducer in my relationship with my husband, to be playful with it, to be able to take the passion, right, that I felt was really foreign, that I could experience from him that I didn't like, that terrified me, and take it and turn it and become a passionate lover myself. And ultimately to be able to make love with the lights on, right? It seems perhaps silly for you to hear that, but it was terrifying, right? Because I didn't want to witness what I didn't want to witness, particularly as a little boy, when the dynamic for me was to float to the top of the ceiling, which isn't unusual for survivors of sexual assault, to separate ourselves from the experience. But now to be able to ground myself and be present would probably be the greatest gift, one of the greatest gifts from having an experience of sexual assault. So it happened for me, right? And yes, I was victimized, and now I'm a survivor of it. But because I'm so intent in any lesson, regardless of how dark it is for me, in finding the light, in finding the lesson, Matthew inspired me to do that with this as well. When I thought it was all bad, I could never speak of it. And this allows me to continue to bring light to it, and allows me to continue to bring right presence through the sacredness of how it is that I connect in my experience with my husband this way.